That's right. There's a substitute host hiding right behind this banner. We've got Dave, Philip, and Bob here on Russ Reals. Russ, as you know, is recovering from eye surgery. He's doing well, by the way. But we're going to run the show on his behalf today and talk about managing business projects. But none of this would be done without sponsors. So thank you to Kaiser Computer. You can go to kaisercomputer.com. There's just a ton of stuff going on with your computer, lots of threats. You can schedule a free consultation over at Kaiser Computer, kaisercomputer.com, and find out what you need to know. And Boulder Falls Inn. They're out in Lebanon, and I was out there recently for an event. It is a beautiful place, a great stopping off point if you're headed to adventure in the Cascade Mountains or you want to explore Oregon wine country. I can tell you that Boulder Falls Inn is the place to go. But with that, we are here for Russ Reels every Thursday afternoon at 4 p.m. right here on the Pacific Coast, and that makes it much later over on the East Coast, so 7-ish, right over there. Russ Reels Live, that's where we're at. Yeah. And make sure you subscribe on YouTube. Grow his YouTube channel. Here's an interesting deal. If you have more than 100 followers on your YouTube channel, you're in the top 10% of YouTubers out there. So go to russreels.live. And so with that, let's get into this show. Dave, Bob, Philip, we're going to be talking project management. I'm going to put the banner back up just so we can see what we got here. How to best manage your business projects. And projects have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And there are some project management fundamentals that are out there. And with that, Dave, let's start with you and have you give a little overview about yourself and your involvement in projects. And then we're going to get into some more stories as we move through here.
Yeah, I love it.
Dave,
Thanks
Bob,
so much, Scott. Yeah, excited to be here with you and Bob and Philip. These guys are all amazing, yourself included. So, yeah, looking forward to get into it. My name's Dave Chrysler, and I own an operations consulting business, working with leaders in manufacturing and distribution, and really getting into kind of the meat of creating and optimizing systems. So as one may expect, we deal with our fair share of projects and, working through them, to your point, kind of not just kicking them off and closing them down, but really managing through the middle and what that means, and keeping everybody on, not just the same page, kind of a prize, but really making the best use of resources that are available. And staying adaptable. I'd say that's probably one of the key lessons of project management.
Perfect. All right. Bob, let's go down to you there in the corner.
Great.
In your kind of your whole film noir thing going on there.
Yeah, I got the dark colors. Maybe I should take my sweater off here.
The
Queen Bohemian Rhapsody kind of album cover. So thanks for having me. Glad to be here with these guys. Bob Feathers, I work for Bindable. I am the senior project manager. Bindable is a technology company, and we are in the InsurTech space. We're a SaaS provider. So we're helping provide our partners the technology necessary to do alternate distribution for P&C insurance products. But prior to this life, I spent over 30 years in the manufacturing world. And a good portion of that was involved in business system implementations. So to Dave's point too, when you're doing implementations and that project management, it's not just about the project itself. It's really about leveraging the product that whatever you're doing implementation wise. It's that continuous improvement. And it's that it never really ends. There's this whole sense of making sure that people love that product and treat it as if it's a part of your employee. And if nobody likes to talk to that employee, why would you hire that employee? So it really is kind of making sure that everyone's leveraging that tool and continuously looking at that tool and how to make that tool better and how to make their jobs better by using that tool.
Nice. All right. Over to Philip.
All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Philip Brown. I am the owner of a consulting company that helps corporations streamline their business processes and project management through software and automation integrations. So I help companies like Disney, Harley Davidson, NASA take what they have currently and kind of put those into a specific software and streamline that process so everything is a little bit less of a lift on the project management team and more visible to the C-level execs when they want to know, how is my project doing?
Nice. Is Harley Davidson and NASA, I've heard of them.
Yeah.
It was
Great.
Tom Peters who wrote In Search of Excellence and a bunch of other things. He had toured the Harley Davidson factory and he said, I thought Harley Davidson sold motorcycles. He said, what Harley Davidson sells is the opportunity for a 35-year-old accountant to put on his leather jacket, ride through a small town, and have people be afraid of him.
Yep. It's all about the experience.
I love that.
Right?
All right. Well, let's go. So projects. Yeah, I'll tell you, everyone has projects. And I mentioned at the beginning, projects have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And people confuse projects and programs. You know, programs start and they're just like a ray, right? They have a point and they just go on for infinity until something happens. But projects should have a beginning, a middle, and an end. But let's talk about some of the other components of it so people can help identify what are the projects they're involved in, whether it's their personal life, their business, nonprofit organizations, volunteer. I mean, we're doing projects all the time. So who wants to kick this one off?
But don't everybody jump in. Yeah, jump in at once.
It was my dad when he went into graduate school. He was doing his MBA at night, and he goes into class, and they're all sitting there, and the professor comes in, signs his name on the board, Dr. Ronald Jones, and turns to the class and says, "Well, does anyone have any questions?" Nobody said anything, so he grabbed his coat and walked out and left.
There you go.
And came back the next week and same thing, writes his name, Dr. Ronald Jones. Anyone have any questions? No one says anything. Grabs his coat and he's about to walk out. Someone speaks up, and he said, "Hey, look, this is graduate school. I'm not going to lead you by the hand. If you don't have any questions, then I can't help you." So,
anyway. All right, I'm going to take it off. I'm going to take it, D. Scott.
All right, Bob.
I've got this. So, let's take a step back. And one of the key components when we think about a project, right, and we were talking about this, is like that beginning, middle, end is the why, right? It's this whole idea of developing the why. Why am I doing this? What is it I'm trying to accomplish, right? So really a really important part of the project to define that end point, to help you define the end, is defining the scope. Why am I doing this? What am I trying to accomplish to get this end point? And then what are the deliverables, right? So that's kind of their key point, is what am I trying to deliver at the end of this thing that I'm doing? Mm-hmm. What am I trying to deliver? And identifying those deliverables and saying, if I've, to reach success, when I feel I've made success, I've reached the end point, these are the things that I should be doing. So you're identifying those deliverables. But there's another really key component of this whole thing is what I'm not going to do. Mm-hmm. And that's the part that people really, and as a project manager, you have to be adamant. You have to really be on top of that, which is that, we call the easiest way to called scope creep, right? It's just that whole idea is that as you're doing it, right, as you're digging in, then people be like, what about this? And so you have to start to temper those ideas, those what about this, and try to make sure you're going saying, okay, that actually is a really valid point. We didn't think about that in discovery. We were trying to think about what we were trying to deliver. Maybe we missed that. Maybe we kind of missed that under discovery as we're kind of figuring this out. And so maybe we say, yes, that's part. Do I need to adjust? Fine. Or that sounds like a great idea. I think that's interesting. But, the 80-20 rule, that's the 20. We can't worry about that right now. You call that, the dreaded, that's day 2. But you kind of put that in that's day 2. But the idea being is, I'm trying to deliver this. This is where I need to get to the end point. I want to deliver this. And there may be some other things I want to do to improve it, because there's never really an end to certain things, right? You want to kind of do an improvement. You say, hey, look, that's a great idea. That's not critical to getting this to market or getting this to the team or getting this implemented or whatever you're trying to do. This is the core of what we need to do. This is a nice to have. You kind of maybe you scale it up and say, P1 is functional blocker. I need to make sure this happens. If I don't do this, then I fail. P2 is I've got to do this. There's maybe a security reason, or maybe maybe there's a client needs something particular UI, something that's not great. And maybe it's a P3. It's that's nice to have, but we don't need to have it right now. So you put it over here. So again, keeping that kind of constraints or those ideas. So that's a key component. What I want to deliver to be successful and what I'm not going to do right now, and just making sure you're true to that, to kind of keep yourself moving so you don't keep going and the project's going on forever and ever.
I love it. We're going to jump over to Dave here in a moment because he had an example. Because there's these three components, right? The scope, schedule, and resources, what you're going to get done, when you're going to get it done by, and how much resources, how much money, people, and so forth can you put toward it. And conflict comes about when people don't understand which is the most important and which is flexible of those. So our friend, Russ Hedge, went in for eye surgery. Well, we hope that scope, that is the quality of the work, is the least flexible. And if it takes a little longer, the doctor can't say, my ride is here and, this is close enough. We got pretty good, right? I mean, there's some things. But if you're looking at scheduling for the Christmas Eve service at your church, you can't just say, well, that choir that we really wanted to have isn't going to be here, so we're just going to do Christmas Eve a week later, right? I mean, these are things that people need to understand that. But Dave, you were just dealing with some clients on this, on balancing these three components.
Yeah, and it's always a challenge. I kind of use we can use Russ's example to kind of give the opposite, right? From a scope perspective, you're going in for maybe one eye, but you would certainly hope the doctor wouldn't take it upon himself to include the second eye without potentially having a pretty significant conversation about that. Right. And it's those types of things, it's a great example to kind of joke about, but that's the reality that we kind of deal with from the project management standpoint. And, back to what Bob was saying in terms of how you navigate the things that potentially were overlooked during the initial scoping and kind of discovery and laying out what this project was going to be versus the, this would be nice to have, and this has certainly generated some additional maybe improvement ideas, maybe something that we could look at for a phase 2 or so on and so forth. And so, managing those expectations, not just for the folks that are involved in the team, but outside of that, right? You have stakeholders that are kind of on the periphery, if you will, and people throughout the organization who are again those kind of non-direct stakeholders that have some obvious connection to what you're doing, and so keeping them abreast of progress and managing those expectations along with who's actually focused on the team. And back to when things do change and you do have to manage those expectations and alterations, let's call them, to kind of the original project plan, how do you pull in new resources, get them up to speed quickly, kind of keep the bounds around those folks, right? So project management really becomes, the core kind of element to keep everything moving and going and, Bob's point, juggling, right? That's what it feels like a lot of times. And Scott, to kind of answer your question earlier, I think about projects in terms of how it impacts our lives, just like I do process, right? Everything can be kind of siloed from that standpoint. So we're dealing with projects and process all day, every day. And it's both in our work lives and our home lives. We could certainly look at certain events like a vacation as laying out a project plan and, what do we need to prepare for that? What are the resources we need to bring together? How are we going to execute this puppy? What's the ins, the outs, the details of all of that. So it's stuff that touches our lives. We might not think of it from that perspective, but it's certainly things that touch us on any given day basis, regardless of if we're managing it or we are just involved in it because we are one of the resources to be pulled from, or we have some other kind of indirect stake in the outcome of that particular project.
Absolutely. And I can see as projects get more complex, I can see where you would want to have a dedicated project manager, and that there's actually certification for that. Philip, let's get your thoughts on this.
Yeah, so I like what Bob and was saying about the why, and the one thing that I see with the projects, and also what Dave was saying, it kind of mixes in with the expectations, is a lot of times projects don't take into consideration whether they're going to be accepted in the end. Coming from the software development project side of it, I've seen where projects are initiated and there's maybe not scope creep, but they didn't take into account the user experience at the end. Do people really want to use this? Are they going to use it? You have to, and even in life, like we all do things, we may not be aware of how it's going to affect everybody else. And part of a project manager's conundrum, I guess, is to make sure that comes together and that everybody accepts it. And they call that change management, right? Make sure that everybody kind of understands the change that's going to happen and that they're slowly taken into that phase so that when you finish the project, it doesn't just fall apart because nobody wants to use it or conform to it or whatever it may be, right? You don't want to plan a vacation to a place that your wife hates. So,
as long as you plan on staying married.
With Russ, but
there was a training video out a number of years ago called Kaizen Toast, and Kaizen, the continuous process. And the guy goes through and he's using how to make toast, because he goes, a simple example, people understand it. He goes through the process, and of course he makes toast, and he calls out to his wife, and she's like, did you make raisin toast? And he just throws it in the garbage, right? Because it's just like, so Philip, I love making sure that when you end, that it's something that is wanted. Otherwise, it was, what a great exercise. Now you're ready to actually do work.
Yeah. I've seen too many companies throw away software when it's done because it just isn't used or it's outdated already. So.
Well, I was just say to that point, Philip, that one of the key points when you're thinking about why, if you're thinking about just software in general in that particular sense, you really have to think about that why is, what am I going to be in 5 years from now?
Exactly.
Like, what do I want to be? Because you cannot, if you're solving for today's problem, you've already failed.
Yep.
Because if it takes you, on average, any real implementation, large scale, takes 6 to 12 or 6 to 14 months, depending on what you're doing. So if you're solving for today's problem, 14 months from now you finished, you've already failed because you're already now 14 months behind of where your business is already gone. And so you really have to think about where you're going and what you want to be or where you think, you have to have that kind of planning, because it is true, because you can essentially get the thing done and then everyone's like, well, that's great, but it's actually not effective for us now because now we're doing something else for whatever reason. So you really have to think about that. So that's really a critical component.
It's a big reason why they introduced like Agile, right? The Agile process and methodology to try to get things done in smaller increments to everyone so that they can see it improve and they can kind of go with the innovation as it actually happens instead of waiting, 16 months or 18 months. And then all of a sudden they're way past that. Right.
Right.
So we got Katie had a question, and I'm gonna give us an opportunity to mastermind with her a little bit on this, but I want to lay out a few more tools first. But she says, I'm turning a project into a program right now. Any advice? Well, we'll get to that in a moment. I want to talk about some general tools. We talked about scope, schedule, and resource. And Dave, I love that you talked about voicing your expectations, making sure we know what's most important, what's flexible, what we can. But there's another tool that's out there that I've used over years, and it's the RACI model, right? It's responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed.
Yep.
And basically what we're saying is within a project, there are people who have roles. And we should start with the A, actually, the accountable person. This is the person that you go to, that if it didn't go well, that's the person you're going to. But responsible, those are the people who actually do the things. Consulted, those are the people that you ask their opinions, but they don't get to make the decisions. And then the informed people, you just said, hey, this is what's going on, and we don't really care what you have to say. I mean, it's nicer than that, but
Hopefully.
if you're planning that family vacation, you're definitely going to be consulting with your wife, and you may just inform the neighbors. They don't really have an opinion, right?
Or the kids.
We're just gone, right?
Yeah.
But let's talk about some of these tools that we can use in our lives as we're doing these projects. What do you guys turn to?
Yeah, from my perspective, I don't get hung up on kind of the framework or methodology, but they're because they're all valuable kind of in their own way. What I find much more important is kind of the things I talk, concept retention, right? So whether you want to follow a very, kind of rigid methodology and kind of execute that to the T, at the end of the day, what we're really measuring is, the effectiveness of what we have done, right, collectively. And so, by taking those elements into account, that for me personally is kind of much more important, because I'm really seeking what the result of the project is, much more so than I'm focused on the specific, methodology or tool or execution method. But, specific to kind of, the methodology that you called out, it's all of the same things I just talked about in terms of, identifying who those stakeholders are, identifying who's doing the work, what resources are we pulling in, who just needs, communication and updates throughout. But again, to me being flexible throughout that process because of the inputs and truly outputs that are changing, right? And those could be business related, those could be people related, right? What happens if somebody key on the team has to leave the team? I've experienced that. Somebody that was, knee deep in integration, that was took a very active role on the team, that we kind of suddenly found out was no longer able to be a part of the project. You're talking about, and Bob, I thought you kind of laid it out great, right? Like, we're in a 9-month implementation, we're in month 7, and a key member of the team is no longer available. What does that do to the impact of delivery, of rolling out the rest of the training, the detailed documentation, all of the other pieces, right? So remaining flexible, has really that's probably the best lesson to pass along, and not just remaining flexible to kind of field every situation, but remaining flexible and having the ability, whomever is kind of managing the project, to say, this belongs with the project, this is going to impact the project, or this is something kind of external that we'll deal with at a later time. And that I've found, at least for me, has really only come through experience. That's very challenging to train somebody how to do in a very short manner. You can train people on methodologies and those things, but taking those inputs and impact and outputs and prioritizing and making decisions on is something that I think just takes practice.
I was just going to put this up, Bill Bradford. I wanted to say hello as I'm walking into the Steelers game. Well, you didn't have to say that, Bill. Come on.
Had to be said. He's a Pittsburgh guy.
Well, that's good stuff. Yeah. Some projects are very complicated. Some are very simple. Some you can manage with a checklist. Some of these other ones that you guys are talking about, very complicated. If you make a mistake, it can cost a lot of money. In some cases, it could sink the business, or at worst, cost lives. But what other things are you? What other tools are you guys looking at?
So I want to really key on what Dave said and take it one layer down, and really again talk about what he said, which is the methodology, right? And again, it's not that I'm not concerned about methodology. It's not that I don't believe in methodology. There's all these great things, but the people that my team that works for me, because they're much younger, is what I'm trying to work with them and is the philosophy, right? To Dave's point, that's really hard. And again, I can give them the tools, and it's a shorter walk, right? They're smart people, and you kind of teach them Agile or Waterfall or all the things, or just whatever software. Maybe you're using Jira, or you're using We Have Rike, or Smart Sheets, or whatever you're using, right? There's tools and all that stuff to help you manage. But what I really try to impress upon them, and what I really teach them, and I really want them to focus on all the time, and they really are getting better at it, is people. You have to spend, as a project manager, most of your time, if you're doing it really well, is really learning the people of your organization, learning their rhythms, learning how they like to communicate, learning how, again, how they like to be communicated to. You really find out where their expertise lies, how they like to work, when they like to work, what their schedules are. Not to be that you have to be expert, like you have to sit there and manage their timeline, but you really have to have this understanding, because when you're managing the project, you have to kind of know, oh, that guy likes to be communicated. I like to give that guy stuff in the morning and then leave him alone. Or this guy likes to be talked to a lot. That guy likes to be pinged a lot. Or this guy likes to be pinged in the evening. You've just got to figure out what the rhythms are, or figure out also other things they're doing. Because don't forget, everyone typically, right, they're not doing one thing. They're doing multiple things at a company, right? You're working on this project, but you're working on your business as usual, right? Maybe you're doing tickets and you're doing, this kind of stuff, or there's defects, right? There's all this kind of work. You're not doing one thing. You're doing 5 or 10. There might be 10 things in your bucket, and how to prioritize those things. So you really got to know the rhythms of your team, because you're a facilitator. You are the conductor. Think of it as a conductor, right? You are out there and you're trying to make sure all the pieces fit. And again, I talked to them about knowing people's schedules too, right? I'll give just a specific example, but just kind of, I said to one of my team members, I said, okay, you need to schedule this meeting, and we need to schedule meetings way in advance, because our calendars get filled really quickly. So we as project managers know when things need to happen. So you go 2-3 weeks out. And I said to him, you need to schedule this meeting with these are the people you need to have in there. And I want you to schedule it here. But I'm going to tell you why exactly. I'm going to teach you why I want you to schedule it here. Because this person that's going to come to this meeting is doing regression testing this week. That's when we're doing our software, software life cycle. So they're doing regression testing. And then the other person on that team is going to be the next 3 days. They're going to be doing the product release. So you want to do it the day after. And it's okay, because that's 2 weeks from now. But because if you sent any one of those 2 or 3 or 4 people an invitation to a meeting during that time frame, they will hate you. And you don't want them to hate you, right?
Right.
You're the facilitator. You want them to work for you. You want to figure out how to get the most out of those people all the time. So again, methodology, tools, all this stuff, that's awesome. But really spend the time. So David said, it does take experience, but I can work with my people to give them a little bit of that. I try to give them the secret sauce, right? Early on, I'm like, oh, you got to just live it. It's like, no, I can tell you why. I'm telling you exactly why you need to do this. And then they start to internalize it. And I'm like, listen to people's speech patterns when they talk. Listen to who's in the meeting, who talks, who doesn't talk. Really pay attention, and pay attention when you Slack that person in the morning. Are they like, are they slacking you back immediately? So again, you're the facilitator. So really learn about your team, because that will go a really long way into that implementation, into that project, to really get the most out of those people and figure out who the players are, and again, their rhythms. So that's a real key beyond all the stuff that we do all mechanically all the day long.
Yeah, meetings. It was a friend of mine said that his version of hell would be that he's in a project meeting, and it's just getting ready to break up, but someone asks a question that only applies to them, but no one can leave until that question gets answered. So anyway, Philip, So,
Well, I mean, I really like what you said, Dave, about the flexibility, because you do have to be flexible. You know, I have 3 clients and they work with 3 different methodologies. So I have to like really myself be flexible, especially when I'm on the different meetings with each one of those clients. And communication is definitely key, because if you don't know how to communicate with certain individuals, it's just going to kind of like you're going to pass them in the night, right? The other piece that I've learned is accountability. You know, I don't shy away from my own accountability, and I try to hold everyone else accountable for what they say they're going to do. So, you know, I've been in too many situations where everybody's trying to say, well, I can't do them and I can't do it because of them and them and them. Well, okay, well, who have you asked to help you? You know? So, you know, take accountability, take responsibility for what you have to do, and help yourself help them find a way to get that done, right? So you can go to your project manager, you can go to your scrum master, whatever that is, and understand how to best communicate that you have a block or you need some help, so that you can stay accountable to what you've been assigned. And that's, you know, that's one of the things that I've seen a lot of rough waters with in projects as well. You know, some companies do it well, some companies not so much. So
yeah, Katie was mentioning some specific programs here: Airtable, Paper Planner, being flexible, again, using Google Workplace. And Bob, I think you mentioned Rike. I like Rike, by the way. Back in the day, we used MS Project, which was basically just a spreadsheet. Checklists for small projects. I use checklists all the time, which were developed, by the way, with World War II aircraft that became more complicated, and you had to do certain things in a certain order. And so checklists are very simple, but they do work.
To a point, depends where the checklist is being used, because you know what happens with people when they have checklists. They just go, oh, there's that checklist again. Check.
Yeah. Well, I'm just saying.
Yeah. It's done. Check.
Yeah. So there are some software tools. I think Trello is another one.
Trello. There's all sorts of, Microsoft. Yeah. Again, there's plenty of tools out there. Yeah. But again, think about. I love tools. Again, Dave and I, we love tools, right? We love the idea of the tools, but the tool isn't the issue.
Mm-hmm.
It's the process. Yep. It's the people in the process. So, again, to Kate's point, like Excel, right? I did one thing, for an ERP system. The one of the ways I tested it out was I just built a simple Excel model. Like, I just had to understand and go out in the plan and really just understand how something occurred, and just had all the numbers and stuff. And then you could take all that and apply it to an ERP. But you're basically telling the ERP what your expectations are based on what you know to be true. And an Excel model works. Very manual and, time consuming and painful. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, you have to understand the ERP is not going to figure it out for you. You have to tell it what those parameters are and what those things are. So again, understanding the real process and why things work, or what are the inputs, the outputs, what are the constraints, what are the things, what are the dependencies and interdependencies and all those types of things. Projects, another one, interdependencies, right? Depending on your projects can be very, complex projects, right? You have to understand then the whole thing's like, hey, these things can happen over here in parallel with these things, right? You don't have to, nothing has to be linear, right? Not everything being linear. There's things going on. So really have a good understanding of that. And again, managing that team to be like, making sure these things are happening and make sure these things are happening. At some point, they may have to join together, but not everything's linear. So just, again, managing expectations. But I want to go back to one key point again, because we've touched on all three of us, and just say it again. And, Russ put it down. Communication.
Yeah.
It's communication across everybody. It's the team. But I would say, again, the stakeholders is a really important one that I think what happens is, you're involved with the people in the project and you're kind of managing that. And it might be some other people that are, kind of involved, or might be the people that are going to get the thing, whatever this thing is. So they're kind of involved in like some inputs, maybe UI, right? Hey, is this going to work for you? Making sure which is another good word Philip brought up, is like, maybe the people that you're doing the work, they're not the end users. So making sure the end users are involved a little bit along the way to make sure that what you're building is going to give them what they want. Mm-hmm. So making sure you're doing that. But I tell you what, those stakeholders, you got to kind of keep them informed, because they will, if you don't talk to them on a regular basis, they'll be like, they'll just think whatever you might have said. The date was April 30th, and you told them 10 times that the date's changed to June 30th, but they never hear you. And then you come to that meeting, all of a sudden they're like, what do you mean it's June 30th? You know, they're like April 29th. They're like, okay, so you ready tomorrow? You're like, no, I've told you 10 times. Like, oh, well, I wasn't really listening then. So you almost have to over communicate and really make sure that you're telling those stakeholders expectations. Here's where we are. Here's where we're going. Here's what changes we had to make. And here's why we made those changes. That's another thing we do a lot of. You know, we do a lot of this. Here's where we are. Here's what's going on. Here's where we're going. Here's our roadblocks. Or not just say, like, and what we're trying to do is not say, like, here's the things that are in our way. What we try to say is, here are the things in our way, and here's what we're doing to mitigate that. So it's not like we're just saying, like, oh, this stuff's in our way. What we're trying to say is, like, hey, here's some things we've identified, and here's what we're doing to mitigate that risk. We've brought another resource on to do this, help us with this particular component. And by the way, because I'm taking this resource, that other thing that you're thinking is going to happen is not going to happen. Did you hear me? That thing's not going to happen, because this is a more critical priority for the business. And I'm telling you now that I'm taking this resource to do it because we feel that this is more important, but we're not going to do this. So just, again, making sure you hear us. Okay, you did. Okay, good. Because I don't want you on April 29th to be like, hey, what's going on with the other thing? Because that happens. So communication amongst the team.
Yeah, and we'll
really
put this we'll put Christine's comment up here. She says, I'm not a project manager, but I'm taking a graduate project management class right now. Sometimes we launch products prematurely or without enough communication or documentation. So she asks, any ideas how to address this in a positive solution-based way? Well,
scoping document.
Bob, you brought that up a little bit. Dave?
The scoping document. It's as simple as that. I mean, it says as simple as that, but it's you go through the scoping document. It's like, what are the deliverables? What defines success? Like, what do I have to actually deliver? What are the testing criteria to, like, say this is success? What am I not doing? And then identifying the team. Who's the team? Who are the stakeholders? Have they been interviewed? Like, really going through. I mean, it is a document. It's a pretty straightforward document, but spend time on it, because I wouldn't kick anything off unless, because again, anybody would be like, well, what are you guys working on, right? If you don't know define what you're working on, then what are you working on?
Dave, what are your thoughts with Christine's question there?
Yeah, I mean, I think Bob kind of nailed it, and it really goes to, we've talked about communication. Everybody understands how important it is, but I think the part that really gets missed with that, some specifics, and kind of touches on Christine's point too, right? It's communication in the stakeholders' language. And I say that very specifically and intentionally, because what we do often is we believe that we are communicating effectively. And the reality is we are communicating with our biases and not necessarily understanding how the other stakeholders across a project scope may be impacted. So while we're trying to say the same things, we may be feeling or perceiving that we're actually butting heads because we're not speaking the same language. And so what does that create, right? Missed expectations, delays in projects, potential scope creep, right? Like all of these other issues because we're not speaking the same language. So getting back to what Bob was saying in terms of, and Christine's kind of, question, but how do you avoid this, right? You have more conversation, but it's not just conversation to be communicating. It's effective conversation. It is understanding how each one of the stakeholders' roles, job, let's say, will be impacted by this potential project. So, and, that's speaking more on like an implementation style project. Obviously, there are other types of projects that people will be involved in. But I'd say that's probably the best way to think about effective communication is really diving into that other stakeholder or multiple stakeholders to understand, are we talking about the same thing here? Are we speaking the same language? When you tell me, right, and I'll use the silo example, okay? So when we talk about, larger scale implementations, we're generally talking about, leadership, finance, operations, IT, right? Kind of the major stakeholders there. So as we think across each one of those silos, are we really speaking the same language, or are we saying kind of things completely different? So when I say, this is a really critical part of my process, does every other stakeholder understand what I'm trying to say and why that's important? And, I'll use an example in terms of like a larger scale implementation, right? If finance, let's say, says, hey, we can't change this process, and the rest of the stakeholders in the team look at that and say, well, finance is being inflexible. Like, not that finance is never inflexible, right? But, why can't they just get on board with us needing to do it this other way? The reality of it is, or the reality could be, that finance isn't saying that. They're just saying the way all of our other processes are set up, this change you're recommending is going to impact that. So if we plan to change all of these other processes along with this process, okay. But nobody had that conversation until we dug into that next layer down to understand what are they really trying to say by giving some pushback. So that's my, kind of answer to Christine's question, but, really trying to dive into that. What is communication, right? Because we all know we're supposed to communicate effectively, but how do we actually do that in a situation like a project management, or a larger scale implementation?
Mm-hmm.
I'll add one quick thing just because I know we have Philip some time. There's just like visual. Some people are visual and some people are words. So even just presentation wise, right? Sometimes it's a bunch of words, but maybe it's like, do the worst first, or here's the key things I like, almost like, here's the 5 things I want you to understand, and put those first. And everything else might be like more detailed stuff that not everyone needs to know. Or as simple as, an Envision or, Microsoft or whatever, just a graph showing this is this part of the project, this is this part, this is this part, here's the timeline, these are happening in parallel, these are linear, whatever. Just that graphical representation, because some people are visual learners, right? And kind of understanding your audience, where sometimes maybe they're not hearing the words, but just showing them a timeline of like, here's where we are, here's where we're going, here's the stuff that makes this stuff up, with red lines, green lines, maybe like red is behind with a date, whatever. But just kind of, it's like very, very visual representation.
Yeah.
Sometimes just a visual representation will really help to bring something home, because sometimes words can be very hard. Even if you're trying to be clear, some people just don't hear it, right? So again, kind of knowing your audience. So sorry,
Philip.
Yeah, no, I love that. And you guys both talked on communication and how to communicate with people. And I always think of three styles of communication when I'm talking with someone. Everybody relates to either pictures, sounds, or feelings, right? So you understand, are you a visual person? Are you someone who likes the words? Are you kind of a feelings person? You have to have emotions attached to it. And if you understand how they relate to one of those or all of those 3 things, you can better communicate with them and kind of get a point across. The other thing with her question was, if it's a time to market issue, then perhaps there's a way to define a minimum viable product, right? What is the least amount that we can do to satisfy what you need, and then build on it afterwards? And that's kind of the other thing that I would suggest there. But yeah,
we
all keep coming back to communication, right? So communication
that's
is
not
very
easy. Trying to come up with a minimum viable product, because what's minimum to me, is, and this is where you have to get involved in that product market fit, right? Where you're actually communicating with those end users. And we've talked about this. Now we've got a great brain trust here in this room, and I do want to help Katie out and talk about how you take a project and move it into a program. And I'll get your thoughts on that. But first of all, I just want to get some anecdotes. Give us some stories that you guys have seen, the good, the bad, and the ugly in these projects.
I'll give you the ugly because it's good, right?
That's the easiest one, Bob.
The easiest to remember.
Well, I can give you lots of good ones because I got those. But anyway, I'll give you the ugly because this was new to me, right? I came from manufacturing, like I said, for 30 years, and was used to a certain side of implementation, right? Where I was doing. So this was a different side where I'm coming now to the software side. It's our software. We're building the software, right? We're building this tool. And so I wasn't really used to that. It was a very different process. And I was kind of came in as like, hey, you're going to help us project manage. We don't have any project management. So you're going to help us with that, help us with the process. But we had a really big blank slate, and I wasn't used to scoping and all these types of things. So I kind of worked with a team, and it was one of those things where we just kind of had this like, hey, go do this thing. And we started to kind of do this thing, but I didn't have the resources. And so we're kind of 3 months in, we're talking about the thing. And, 3 months in, like, how's the thing going? I'm like, we're here. We're still trying to figure out what we're doing, but I still don't have the team yet. And meanwhile, the CEO has already told the customer, like, we're going to have this thing done by the end of the year. Right. So as the year's kind of progressing, I don't actually get this team of real developers in earnest until the end of July, August. So then we start to really go, hey, what are we doing here? And I started to say to them, we're going to rebuild this thing from scratch, pretend it doesn't exist today. What do you want to do? And we really challenged them. But by doing so, we really were like, let's start building. So then by October, by September, we're starting to like build, but we're nowhere close. So as the years kind of progressing, like, how's it going? We're like, I don't know. So anyway, it took us that whole year, and think about it. The first 3 months is like me just starting there and kind of figuring stuff. The next 3 months is like trying to get a team together. And then the last 3 months of the year was like just actually trying to build and kind of understand what we were trying to do. It wasn't until the first half of the second year. Anyway, fast forward, they're kind of going, why don't we have this thing? We're supposed to have this thing. We kept moving, the line kept moving until finally the chief product officer came in, and we kind of came in and started to really identify what we're trying to accomplish and what that line was. What is the minimum viable product? What do we need to get to? And one of the key components was getting to a workable model where I could pull the guys, developers out and say, we're going to start alpha testing. I'm going to give it to some people in our company because I need them to start looking at this thing, because you guys have been staring at this now for 8 months and you're going to go insane because you're going to try to find every little thing. I said, take a break. But I made sure they were alpha testers, not beta testers. And I say that very clearly because there's some people in my company, I didn't want to make the developers cry. There's certain people that are really good. They would have found things that just would have made these guys cry. So I kind of went through. But anyway, it took us a lot longer because in the end of the day, what happened is we didn't really do the true scoping. We just kind of were like, hey, do this thing. And so anyway, I learned from those mistakes of, I hold myself accountable as a real learning curve of like really scoping a project and really getting the right team and communicating what resources I didn't have and being very clear where we were along the process, because it was a little learning curve. But anyway, the projects these last 2 years have been awesome.
Nice. Philip.
Oh, well, I was going to go with bad, but since Bob already took it, I won't tell you about the knockdown, drag out fight in the conference room. But the good is, I guess, there's a sense of euphoria when you take a facility that has 100 engineers that each do their own thing and have an Access database or an Excel spreadsheet for every project that they want to manage. And you kind of combine all that together and you understand one specific process that everyone is supposed to follow. And then you put that together into one system, one specific software that manages all of it. Right. And it doesn't have to be a specific, like, I'm not going to name a software, but basically, I brought all these databases, Excel, Access, all that together. And the one thing that I noticed is once the engineers saw what the other engineers were doing, the productivity went up and collaboration increased because they were all siloed in their specific duties that they wanted to do. And instead of communicating and collaborating, they were busy making their Excel spreadsheets and updating them to send the reports that they needed to send up to management, right? It got a lot easier when they collaborated and they can like put everything together and send a portfolio report up to management. And then management was happier, of course, because they had everything in one spot instead of getting an email from 100 different engineers on what their status was on their 4 or 5 projects that they were working on. So that's probably that's the best story that I have, where you really need to streamline your processes and have some kind of something manage it right, so that you can give that holistic look over what your whole portfolio programs and projects are.
Nice, David.
Yeah, I think I'll go against the grain and share a good one as well. So the bad ones and the ugly ones seem to be easier to pick on. But I think back on all of the different projects. One of the biggest projects that I worked on was a facility relocation, and again, kind of getting back to the early question that you had, Scott, in terms of how do projects kind of come to be, and what are they all about? And some may think of a facility relocation as not necessarily a project, but it has all of the same elements, right? We have a goal of moving from one location to the other. We have so it was very easy to kind of define the scope. We've got to take all of this, 100 and some odd thousand square feet of equipment and move it to another, set of square feet. We've got all of the resources that we need to pull from. So we've got to plan for not just the internal work, right? So how do we wind down one facility in terms of, incoming customer load, actual production, right? So you think through all of those key components. Then we have all of the physicality of an actual move, right? How do we prep the new site? Electrical, pneumatics, foundation work. How do we prep for all that? How do we plan and put all of those pieces into play to be able to accept and receive, the different loads that needed to be scheduled, and how many different truckloads? Do we need flatbeds? Do we need, closed trailers? So putting together a project of that magnitude with a very tight timeline was probably one of the coolest things that I saw come together in terms of being able to not just plan, but to execute against that project plan, and to be taking things both, from a flexibility standpoint, because I touched on that, a communication, standpoint, and not just, keeping, stakeholders kind of apprised and kind of engaged, but also those indirect folks that we're helping to either support or to receive. So, the point of that particular story is just, you can apply these principles very broadly to nearly anything you kind of run up against in the business world and or your personal life. And, the vacation was a great example, I thought. But, this is equally the same. It's not just software implementation that we need to talk about project management with. And it's not just manufacturing. It's, this touches all industries, all size companies, kind of every type of thing that you could look at in terms of, these types of initiatives. You could really put a project plan around. And I think it's valuable for people to learn these skills because I do think it makes you, a more informed and kind of impactful leader. Even if you're not necessarily at, that kind of title, if you will, right? You can be a leader and be a part of a team and not have people that report to you and all of those things, right? I think all of these fundamentals make you a very well-rounded, contributor in an organization, regardless of kind of title and where you happen to fall on the org chart.
Well, Dave, while you've got the floor, and we're going to wind this down, we'll go to you, Philip, and then Bob. Give some advice to Katie here about turning a project into a program, and then tell people how they can get a hold of you, Dave.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to find out a little bit more detail about that. So, from a high level, the fundamentals are really the same. Thinking about, why are we doing what we're doing? What are the resources that we need to be able to land that plane? And how are we going to maintain it? Right? How are we going to communicate? How are we going to maintain? Is this something that we need to continually improve and look at it from that standpoint? So if there are different iterations or points, kind of success points, if you will, milestones, what have you, how are we going to look at all of those and kind of evaluate that to continue moving forward? when is good enough, right? So depending on what we're really talking about, maybe it should still be a project, right? I don't know. There's all kinds of considerations with that, but Katie, you know where to find me. I'm always happy
And how do we get a
have a
hold of you, Dave?
conversation. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active there. I'm also on Twitter a fair bit, and you can always find me on our website as well.
I love how we still call it Twitter. Philip.
Well, I think Dave said it the best. You really got to look at what the reasoning is behind wanting to move it from a project to a program, because there are so many similarities when you go from that project to a program. And I know sometimes programs will consist of multiple projects, but you can also have projects that have sub projects, right? So it's kind of a hard one to tell without a lot of details. But yeah, I don't have any additional really to add. I think Dave did a really good job.
We'll bring Katie in sometime.
Yeah, I mean, and feel free to reach out to me as well on LinkedIn.
And how might we do that? Oh, through LinkedIn and
through LinkedIn, through my website, which is bluepitt.com, BLUPITT.com. And yeah, I'd be happy to help anyone.
Fabulous. Mr. Bob Feathers.
So again, I would say it's a program. It's probably always a project in a way, if we're thinking about it that way. So what you're trying to do is figuring out, one, what the cadence is. Like, what am I trying to accomplish? Maybe this is, again, I think of a program as like just continuous improvement, right? It's like you've kind of finished the thing, and now you kind of want to make it this component. I think about it, what I'm doing now with my organization, which is from project management. Back to Dave's point is, I'm a project manager and I do project management in my company, but I'm helping other people within my organization use the tools we use in project management for other things like marketing and campaigns, because the campaigns have a bunch of different tasks, and those tasks are a project. I got to do this thing. I've got to update this thing. So there's other areas of the company in sales. I'm having one of my team working with our agency to help them build processes behind what they're trying to do for an agency program to do, again, maybe an improvement on this particular sales thing they're trying to do. So think of it that way in a project. So I think about that program. I think of it as it's ongoing. So then what I do is I break it into different components. And one thing I do is say, maybe there's a component of the things we'd like to do, and then prioritize them. Put a P1, P2, P3, P4, prioritize these things. Be like, this has to happen functionally. We need to really make this happen. P2 is like, there's UI or some kind of defect, something that's like, I can get through the thing I want to do, but it needs to be improved. 3 is like, that's nice to have. P4 is like, worth a discussion. P5 is like, just short of, going out the door. But maybe try to prioritize the things you want to accomplish. Then maybe there's things like in a defect world, right? Things that are coming on that people come and say, hey, this thing that your program's not working. How do I fix this, right? And start to divide these things in. Have a team that's kind of looking at them and have a normal cadence to just kind of continue the program, because the program is this ongoing. So you just kind of make sure you're always nurturing it and feeding it and talking about it and helping people with it and leveraging it and training people, whatever it is, that program. So it's kind of an ongoing. So in a way, it's an ongoing project.
How do people get a hold of you, Bob?
I'm here on LinkedIn. And if you want to see what I cook, you can go to Instagram and see some fun.
Well, there you go. All right. Hey, I'm just going to put this up and say thank you guys for Dave, Philip, and Bob for joining me as a guest host today on Russ Reals Live. Russ is doing well. You saw that he was commenting there, so he's able to do that. Thank you all for joining us today, and thank you to the sponsors, to Kaiser Computer and Boulder Falls Inn for sponsoring Russ Reels today. And stay in touch. I'm going to wind this one down. Guys, if you can hang out in the blue room or green room or whatever color room it is we're going to send you to, thank you so much.